Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the ongoing series interview with an exorcist. My name is John Barnwell, and I'm here in the greater Detroit area with Dr. Douglas Gabriel, and we've been cascading through his many adventures, and it's leading us down the path to where we decided to take a closer look against the era of falsehood in which we're currently going through. And if anybody can't tell, they're not paying attention. But in Dornoch on January 20th of 1917, Dr. Rudolf Steiner, in the lecture cycle, The Karma of Untruthfulness, Secret Societies, the Media, and the Preparations to the Great War. And these were addressing the current situation, but that situation, as we know from the research that's been done in American intelligence media and Americans for Innovation, that it's an ongoing movie in which we've all been cast into unwittingly. And so he says, we must ask ourselves, why do certain people do the kind of things we've been talking about? Which leads to the next question. Why are we living in an age when untruthfulness is working as a dominant force in the world? A force which drives human beings with a veritable passion that could, if only it would turn towards the truth instead, bring about infinitely much in the way of healing. These things indeed are connected with what are at the moment the deepest impulses of humanity. We can gain a closer understanding of them in a manner appropriate for our time by including it in our considerations. The most urgent task that spiritual scientific view of the world, which we have made our own. Remember that our anthroposophical spiritual science seeks to understand certain spiritual aspects which exist in the world, certain forces which are at work in the world of human beings insofar as they develop not only between birth and death, but also between death and a new birth. It is difficult for people to think about these things in the right way because they have lost certain faculties which were once present in human evolution. For a while, these faculties had to go underground, but now they must light up again through spiritual science, end quote. And so to help us examine that consideration, how you doing there, Douglas?
I'm doing very well. It's beautiful. The fall is coming on, all those beautiful trees out there. And yes, what you just quoted is something we've been discussing, the fact that we live in a sea of lies, that the karma of untruthfulness has created the fact that, how about this one, that people don't believe that they had a life before birth and they don't believe they have a life after death. They believe that lie, that there is no such thing because they have lost those organs, those supersensible organs of perception that Rudolf Steiner talks about in that quote, that we need to be able to see the spiritual world. In the past, it was natural clairvoyance, and people could directly contact these beings and have communion with them. That's where all the great wisdom of the past came from. It wouldn't make sense that the ancients were more wise than we are now if it was a progression of wisdom or intelligence. No, you see, it's a communion with the spiritual being. So we live in a time when, fortunately, I would say 9 out of 10 of my children's friends, I say, do you believe in reincarnation? They go, of course. Well, do you believe in karma? Yeah. What? Of course I believe in karma. Okay. How is that? For a clairvoyant like myself, and that's what I want to address this show to, is the way that a clairvoyant lives amongst those lies and how they protect themselves from being attacked. Because as Rudolf Steiner said, every time you lie, you create a demon. You create an elemental being that goes on living that affects people karmically until you end the life of that elemental being. Now, who is ready to be responsible for that?
And it's even, in a sense, worse than that, because when you get into these uh, specters, as he calls them, of the group image of these false ideas that becomes an actual presence across the threshold that can distort one's consciousness and cause a dislocation in an unwholesome way of the various vehicles. Now, we know we have the old Saturn, old Sun, and old Moon evolutions that preceded Earth evolution, where we're now, fully physical humans and all of that. But that we have to understand that the vehicles have different ages, and so our astral body is received during the old Moon evolutionary period, before Earth evolution began. So it's quite young, and the ego only entered through the agency of the spirits of form, the Elohim, through the impulse of Christ. And so it's the youngest member. And so it's really not very adept at this point in dealing with a great many of the things that we are talking about. But it is now time to begin to take up the task to integrate into what Rudolf Steiner referred to as the spirits of freedom and love.
Absolutely. And we need to take over what they're doing and develop our own supersensible organs so that we can handle the development of our own thinking, feeling, and willing into higher forces of thinking, feeling, and willing. And how do you do that? When you're a clairvoyant, and for instance, when I was giving readings, or as I talked about last time, I'd go into corporations and sit around the boardroom, do the astrological chart for the corporation, do the card system, the playing card system for the date of their incorporation, get everybody else's dates together, and literally we would create a mood of the threshold where when you cross the threshold, it becomes perfectly clear whether you're going out of the third dimension into the fourth dimension or down back into the second dimension. Are you going to just become a shadow, substanceless shadow, or are you going to evolve beyond time, basically? And then you can go beyond that. You can evolve beyond space and evolve beyond consciousness. And those things you can see in the human ego, astral body, etheric body, and physical body. Now, here's the way that kind of works in a general sense. And this is very difficult to explain, but I used to teach this to people. And once they understood it, bingo, bango, they started seeing auras. The second that it's like you stand next to the person doing something, and pretty soon you can do it. You don't know why, you just can do it. And so I would just simply take people through the logic of what it is you're looking at. And simply, basically through a Sherlock Holmes form of deduction, look at what is presenting to you in a reading, okay? So for instance, I'm looking at myself in the reading and I go, oh, this guy's got liver problems. Oh, I'm talking about me. Oh, this guy's got heart problems because of that big line right there, the big liver problem line right there. And he's got, looks like his he's going to have some problem with his atriums, with his heart, both sides. Oh, well, that actually happened to me. Liver? Oh, yeah. Had I not gotten those 5,000 stones out, I'd probably be dead. Oh, look. So you can literally analyze the face, look at the nose, see what stands out, what jumps out at you. You can read the ears. This is thinking. This is feeling. And the way it laps over here tells you all about their feeling life. And then this is willing. So you can, without being a psychic, looking at the physical. Now, the point here is that in ancient India, they tried to divorce themselves from the physical and say that the physical was just illusion. It's Maya. And it is all that. But it's also the deepest layers of what John just said. You have an ancient Saturn being in you called the mineral body, an ancient sun being in you called the etheric body, an ancient moon being in you called the astral body, and now you have an ego. So as you're looking at somebody, generally, most psychics, all they're doing is looking at the unresolved astral body of the person. That's it. That's all they're looking at. And that's very superficial because your emotions, your astral body, your desires are like a roller coaster. So as you're looking at that, you might see even some colors. Like, I used to have these clairvoyants who'd say, yeah, I see the colors and the colors of the aura and the chakras. And then you'd ask them some details and you'd find out that they were projecting those colors on what they were seeing. And that's another way that a clairvoyant works. They project an energy, a thought, a feeling, or an invisible form at the person. And then you see what bounces back to you, like sonar. Or you can do radar, whatever they're raying out at you. Or you can do analyzing them, watch the way they walk, or especially, Rudolf Steiner said, look at the gesture their face is making when they're speaking, or the gestures their hands or their body are making when they're speaking, because that will literally tell you all about their past karma through their will, by their gestures, about their the things that they actually feel, the things that drive them, their virtues or their vices. That's in the heart, and that comes as a sound. Or it could tell you what their thoughts are, and those come as light or color. And so you can actually have an interaction between you and the person you're giving the reading to and sound them out like a bell. If I take a little bell, say, close your eyes, and then I ring the bell, and it's a cheap little old aluminum bell. Oh, think me, not a very nice sound. Then I pick up a silver one and I ring it. Oh, you can tell the difference. Then I pick up a gold one, solid gold bell, and ring it. That's called timbre, isn't it? That's what everything producing a frequency, a sound, a light, or a form, a morphic resonant form that's being expressed into the world through their metabolic and their gestures, their metabolic system. All those things sound in the psychic, light up, sound, and move the psychic into realms of imagination, inspiration, intuition. And so I'm going to try to describe that more, and also describe what you can do to protect yourself from these things coming at you, because very sensitive people have written to us and pointed out that they wanted to know how to put up the shields, as I call them, or how to protect yourself. And then also, how do you protect yourself from all this that's coming in from the organization you're working with, that you might have had to compromise your integrity to work with them so that you could pay your bills? So are you creating these what are called platitudes, slogans, specters, phantoms, and demons by lying to the people you work with, that you'd like to tell them that you hate them or whatever, some horrible things, or what you'd like to really do to them if you could and not get caught? Okay, so are you creating yourself some kind of negative double or doppelganger through those activities? Yes, you are. But what we want to talk about today is, because I've talked so much about what that looks like in an exorcism, and in other conversations we've had in this series, we've talked about what does a demon look like when it's hanging out someone who's possessed? What's the difference between the demons hanging out and someone who's obsessed and someone who's possessed, or someone who's just a megalomaniac? So we're going to talk about that too, and that Rudolf Steiner calls the 3 levels of Babylon, relating it to, of course, the Apocalypse and Revelation. But anyway, these are the things that we hope can be helpful to you, because what I see as the remarks made in the comments below our podcasts are basically people saying, yeah, you reminded me of the time that happened to me, and this and that. And by the way, what does this mean? Because this happened to me. And so if you see, I respond to every single remark that arises, and try to explain to people what may have happened to them in some of their experiences with the threshold experience that I'm talking about, the threshold between the physical and the spiritual world.
Yeah, to frame this within Rudolf Steiner in the same lecture, he says, now the spiritual science for which we are striving gives us concepts of the supersensible world working in and behind the sense-perceptible world. The concepts and ideas given to us by spiritual science, in which we make our own, are related to nothing that can be perceived by the senses. They relate either to what lies between death and a new birth, or to the supersensible world which lies beyond the world of the senses, Comprehension of these is not, or ought not to be, mere comprehension of certain theories. We are not concerned with knowing one thing or another, but with achieving a certain inner mood of soul. When we take in truths relating to the supersensible world, it is difficult to describe these things in words because our language has been coined for the external physical world. So we have to exert ourselves when applying it to supersensible conditions. You could say that everything to which we ordinarily apply to our understanding lives coarsely, densely in our soul because our brain is always at our disposal and is trained to deal with ideas and concepts relating to the physical world. But to explain things which do not relate to the physical plane, we have to exert our soul to such an extent that when we study spiritual science, our brain plays an ever decreasing part. And so, and that doesn't counter indicate what Douglas was talking about, because we do wear on our face, of course, the results of our interaction with the world and karma and all that. And so there is a symbiosis that takes place. But what Rudolf Steiner is referring to is developing that, what he referred to as the Christ language in his principal work, Occult Science and Outline, where he says that, and elsewhere on numerous occasions, he says that this is the language of Christ. This is the concepts we need to be able to develop an understanding of experiences that are going to come to us in the future. And that if people don't develop this, that coming to them of the supersensible will be a very chaotic state of affairs.
Yes. So as you're trying to help someone, you're looking at their ego, their astral body, their etheric body, their physical body. First off, unless you're really highly developed or you happen to be born with the curse of clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience, you're going to have trouble going any further than superficially entering into two stages, their ego and their astral body. First off, when you enter into someone's ego and you're doing a reading for them, all it takes is one word. One word. You know, Denny Fairchild, one of the best psychics ever. I was on the show many times. He'd hear hello. That's all he'd hear from the person on the telephone. And he'd give him a great reading from hearing the word hello spoken. And if he, you could tell if he was searching around for something, he'd just ask him any question, and whatever the answer was, didn't matter. That's it. A very sensitive person can take the delivery of speech and know who you are from previous incarnations just by the way you speak.
Or even just the realm of sound. There's this trick I used to do when I worked in a restaurant, and I'd be there with the two cooks, and I'd have them flip a quarter, but they had to make it ring when they flicked it by hitting it with their thumbnail, and I would call it heads or tails, and I get like 12 out of 12 because it was my presence of mind to the sound that moment was encapsulated in that sound. And so by getting in the right frame of mind, I could accurately, and I did it time and time again. I used to really blow their mind. But really, it's a very simple thing. Once you understand the type of thinking that goes behind it, one can do these things yourself, and you can like sit at home and play with quarters. But so that whole idea of the relationship between the realm of feeling and the realm of sound is really critical.
And that's where it comes from, the realm of the heart, the blood circulation, the breathing. But when we're looking at somebody's, for instance, I'd walk into a room where someone was supposedly possessed, and immediately I'd know, take this and that object out of here, because they had put energy into it. If the spirit comes so far into the physical body of the person that they're possessed, it literally starts possessing things in the room, especially things that they become attached to or obsessed with. And so This physical thing going deep down, that's the opposite of what ancient India did, which was they wanted to go up. We need to go down and understand the real mysteries of the physical body, but we don't get past the head. Rudolf Steiner says when someone speaks to you, because your concepts might not be like theirs, first thing you want to do is the asocial or antisocial action of going to sleep because they're boring you to death, because they're not saying what your concepts say in your head. And so you can't accept them. And pretty soon, if you stay awake, you become really agitated and you actually start to dislike them. Okay. That's the superficial level of looking or experiencing, witnessing, which one could call sounding out the other person's thinking. Well, let's remember, John brought this last time, also from the Karma of Untruthfulness, that the etheric body is reflected in the head. Your thoughts don't happen in the head. Your perceptions don't happen in your head. The information goes there, but until your heart then creates a relationship to it, you can't even derive a concept. All your thoughts come from your mind, and your mind is in your heart. The head is a mirror of the past. That's the reason I can look and say, oops, looks like this body I got this time, I'm going to have a little problem with the heart and a little problem with, as well as John said, we imprint that into our palm, our hand, our face. I love to do palm readings. And one palm is who you came in as, and the other one is who you've become. And that if it's your right-handed, your right hand becomes completely different than your left hand, and it actually evolves. And you can watch it evolve. So these imprints into the physical body are deep, deep levels of the archive, of your willpower, of the great mystery. So to go down below the ego, where you simply wish to reject the person, and you go then to the next level of the astral body, and what you're looking at then are basically colors, images, imaginations, two-dimensional images, basically like, I don't know how to describe this. It's like an angel you can only see it from one direction. It's like a one-way mirror, okay? So you're talking, when you think that you're going into when you are going into a higher realm, you think you're going into, multi-dimensions, but in fact, you're dissolving the third dimension, the second dimension, the first dimension, and zero. And that is the realm of the human, the realm of the animal, the plant, and the mineral. And so you can see these different bodies in the person. They may not be able to see them. And when I say see, I mean witness. You can perceive through supersensible organs. And how do you create those? Develop the higher virtues, develop your morality, do the spiritual work, and don't just talk about it, do it. You have to do this stuff if you intend to change yourself. But when you're giving a reading to somebody, when you see them and they start talking, if there isn't light coming out of their head, that's because they may not have any thoughts. They may have never had a thought in their entire life. They may be nothing but a reflex. They may be nothing but what we call a reptilian person. They may be a person who has no soul. They may be, like many of the young men I met in prison, in juvenile detention facilities, when I was the superintendent of 24 different schools. These children are asocial. They don't know right from wrong because they may not have a spirit. They may not have a soul. And that sounds radical, but I've met plenty of them. And they have capacities that are really, really very, very bizarre. And when you get close to one of them, you literally, and this is a fact, they emit brain waves that hypnotize you. And that's how people become serial killers, mass killers. It's how people can project evil because they have no morality. Their cerebellum has basically been turned off. Everything that the animal world of good and bad could have taught them, they've turned off. And so what happened to them in their childhood is so horrible, they can do it to the rest of the world. And they have no compunction, they have no guilt, they have none of that. So there's all kinds of beings you can meet. And all you have to do is ask them a simple question like, what color is the sky? And believe me, you could do an entire reading on a person from just their answer, because they may laugh and say, well, it's blue. Well, I don't know. Well, when you see dark through light, it's actually, ask John the question of what color the sky is, and you're going to see his thinking process, right? and it won't be like other people's. So what comes out of the eyes as light and color is completely different in the head than it is the rest of the body. But in the rest of the body, as I said, if you look at a chart of the nerves and you turn it sideways, what do you see? You see the 7 major chakras as nerve ganglia. You also see many other ones, other little centers. According to the Tibetans, there's 10,000 chakras on the body. According to ancient India, there's 100. There's these channels that move, and you can see, witness this stuff. You can look at somebody and say, "Holy moly, there's nothing running through their left arm, and it goes all the way back to their heart." And then you can assume, you can ask the question and bounce it off their heart, any question you want if you're truly clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. So I'd ask the question, is the thing happening you might not even notice that they move their left arm in a funny way when they speak, right? Well, then you ask the question, have you had problems with your heart? And the person says, yes. And say, yeah, well, you need to make sure that you're working on that. And then give them an exercise that moves that, say, through doing Rudolf Steiner's eurythmy exercises for L to help the heart. So I do those every single night to help my heart. And so gestures of the body are so powerful that when you usually meet somebody, what happens? First off, they're going to walk there. They might walk up to you, right? Well, I can do a whole reading. The person does not have to say one single word. And I can do a whole reading in the old days from watching the way they walked, the way they moved their hands, the way they held their head. And literally, you can tell their illnesses, you can tell their psychological preferences, whether they're leaning forward, whether their pelvis is tilted forward, medium back, left or right, whether they tip their shoulder up or down, when they listen, whether they turn their left or right ear to you. And then as a clairvoyant, you can look right into their physical body and say, when you speak, their sensitivity can be determined by whether the bones in the ear, which this was only discovered a few years ago, and Rudolf Steiner had insinuated this, and others knew this and said it, that until the bones of your ear are inclined forward, you're not listening. You can't really hear. You may hear, but you can't listen. So a clairvoyant can sound that with either a geometric shape or a sound from their heart, or literally words from their head by asking a question and see the response. So this is what I'm watching the whole time that I'm doing a reading for somebody. I use the card system. I was going to bring it, that funny little card system, and I may hold that, or I may hold an astrological chart, or I may look at their palms, or, I don't get into telling them that I can read the bumps in their heads or their lines in their face or the way their face is made or the lengths and size of their fingers and so on and so forth. You can read anything. You can read tea leaves. You can read the tarot card. You don't have to study the tarot card and get its meaning. You can, many psychics who use the tarot card have no idea what those symbols mean. That's not what they're using it for. They're just using it as a prompt in the spiritual world to sound out the other person. So that's what you get when you approach a person. That can happen before you do anything. But here's the trick. If you want to understand your previous incarnation with another person, it usually comes at the moment that you meet them before you touch them. The second you touch them, it can diffuse the whole thing, and you might not be able to see some things that are given as gifts because of a past karma together. So if I meet someone, I make sure that if I'm doing a reading for them, and I immediately can look in their astrological chart and see if I'm related to them and whether I have possible incarnations with them, which would change the reading, because then I'd want to be very, very, very careful about what I said. Or I can look this up and see, their inclinations, and then I know how to approach them. But that would then tell me what to do next. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is whatever I said I was going to do, give them a card reading, give them an astrological reading. But that's not the first thing I'm going to do. First thing I'm going to do, go ahead, John.
Yeah, one way you can look at it in reading cards, or a horoscope for that matter, in the East, in the ancient East, they developed the systems of what are called mandalas, or like tankas in Tibet and all that. And I've talked about this before, but it was many, many episodes ago. But there's these like little squares in the mandala, and those are skandhas. And those are kind of like doors or windows into karma. And so you could see the cards themselves when you lay them down, because they go through a transformation in time along with everyone else, everything else. And I mean, you could read the leaves falling down from the trees if you were really good. I mean, King Wen developed the I Ching by looking at the uh, forms around the edge of the tortoise shell. And so you have this whole idea that the universe at all times is a macrocosmic, microcosmic reflection, but it's in process. It's in process in time. And so what Douglas is talking about, getting them to do something, gives you an entry point at which to gain insight.
Absolutely. For instance, you could just ask them a simple question. What's your totem animal? Right there, whatever happens, that's going to tell you so much. It's ridiculous, but you wouldn't do that in a reading because basically, I have people sit down and don't say one word. And if they want to get very stoic and look at me like you're not going to see any reaction from me, no matter what you say, because they know that anybody can ask you a couple questions, see your reaction, and tell so much about you, more than you wish to even reveal. So you have to be just sensitive to whatever approach you're going to take with the person and whether they're open, whether they've opened their aura, and whether you are opening yours to them. Because in some cases, I leave my shields up. I can still go through my shield from the inside out, but I don't allow things from the outside to come in. It's like a mirror that it is a one-way mirror, and it's a sphere that goes around your body. That's usually, they call it surrounding yourself with the sphere of light, but it's really like a two-way mirror or one-way mirror, I guess.
Yeah, the idea of the armor of God, and that there's this whole idea of generating this protective field. But what is that? Where is that coming from? What that is said to be in the esoteric Christian stream is that it's a participation in higher orders of being, so that you're through self-reference making a conscious step into being aware of the divine spiritual beings and carrying that in your consciousness. And if you do that, you can get their attention, and then you'll receive from the divine spiritual beings inspirations, imaginations, and intuitions that will assist in your development. But mind you, in the ancient period, like the first quotation I was reading Rudolf Steiner, he talked there, if I continued on, about how in the earlier periods of mankind's evolution, that everybody knew, that there was a life before death and after death, and all, because they could see it, but it was something that was donated to them by other orders of being. Now we've reached a point in our maturation to where it's up to us to be able to unfold our wings, so to speak, to be able to have it come out of our individual being, that we're not trying to just like merge with the absolute and just like blot out our existence like some people interpret their goal. And that's a very Luciferic way of looking at the world. In the Christ mystery, it's about being able to develop as a spirits of freedom and love, with the freedom that you're doing this out of your free impulses. But in order for that freedom to exist, there has to be these contrary forces. And that opposition, which is actually between Lucifer and Ahriman, or Lucifer and Satan. It's not between Christ and Lucifer or Christ and Satan. They are going at it with each other. The Christ impulse is that which finds the balance.
Oh, yeah. You talk about the spiritual coat of armor. I have a different take on it. I yield to your scholarly approach, and I wouldn't at all push back on it. But for me, it came a little different. Remember, I wasn't an anthroposophist like you were. I was just some chick out there, and I was having all these experiences. And the first time I noticed it was I was in a very dangerous situation back in 1984 and was with some dangerous people, but I didn't realize it at the time. Only as I look back, I realized, wow, that was not a good idea, where I was and what I was doing. But what I know too is that they were trying to penetrate me and harm me, but they couldn't. They also knew they couldn't, because they knew I carried a spiritual vibration that was unpenetrable. And where does that come from? So for me, from my experience, I believe it comes from the moment that you step foot on the path with Jesus Christ and start following the way of Christ. Then through these incarnations, you're building up. Well, like if I don't do evil, if I follow Christ's way and I don't harm someone, although I will say this, and I'll go out on the limb, that congressmen that vote for the military draft need to get out of the way from me, because that is only going to murder our boys. But anyway, I'll do it up to a point where I'm not creating a karma. So in the next lifetime, those people can't do it to me, because we've already settled it out. And then over 2,000 years, because from the moment that Christ walked the earth, he said, you people, you need to get your act together and follow the way. I'll tell you what you need to do. And you should have been doing it in all of your incarnations. And if you've arrived at this point in our human history and you haven't, then you're going to meet your challenge, because you have holes in your spiritual armor.
Yeah, it's Riddlestein is very clear, and he speaks directly to what you just said, because he says your ego, your curios, your Lord, that which you receive through the Elohim, the spiritual form, through the agency of Christ, that it's an intimate relationship between you and Christ. None of these other beings can go there if you don't give them permission to. It's your direct relationship to Christ, and it's the ultimate.
And here's the thing, the Spear of Antioch, which we hold, the reason that it worked back in the Crusades is because it carries the energetic, the vibration, the resonance of the blood of Christ. And with that, you could just hold that staff and walk out of the fortress with your troops, starving, and walk through the enemy, and they cannot touch you. That's how literal this is. And so on behalf of everyone that watches our reports, I hold that staff now for all of us. It is our standard as we walk through this perilous time in history. Now here's the question, and I'll ask you, Douglas, and I'll get off. How can you begin to make your spiritual coat of armor? Can you find one ready-made?
Absolutely. Faith, hope, love, truth, beauty, all the virtues, build up those. Now, the nice version of it in the Bible is good. The helmet, the shield, the sword, the whole thing, your breastplate. But the point is that it is virtue. As you build virtue, you create a protective armor. When you use vices, you become a dragon that puts another scale on yourself and goes down instead of going up. And so basically, you could also say it's putting another feather in your wings. And what you said is so true. The frequency of Christ, both of you mentioned something to this effect. The first thing I experience is the frequency of Christ from somebody. It's a selfless frequency. And either they have that, or unfortunately, in many, many cases, they have elementals hanging out around them, unconscious elemental beings, which are phantoms and specters and demons and all kinds of other things, because people, if they're unconscious, Rudolf Steiner says there's 3 levels of Babylon. The unwitting people who fall for it because they're being told by the general narrative and culture that this is what you do, even though they know it's a sin, it's bad, it's the fruit from the tree of good and evil. It's not always that simple, but basically the unwitting person falls into the clutches of the whore of Babylon, and she's drinking, the blood of the innocents. And she is basically the exact same thing. These are laws of Hammurabi back in the time of Babylon that created economic slavery, usury, banking, all the horrible evil of our day still continues on. And so then there are people who are consciously doing that and consciously serving the whore of Babylon in Babylon. And we know who they are in today's age. the Pilgrim Society and the whole group of them. So then there's the third, and those are the most dangerous. Those are the ones who are willingly allowing themselves to be possessed by the spirit of materialism, the spirit that says, as John is pointing out, you don't have a pre-birth state and you don't have an after-death state. You're just a physical thing, and that's all that's going to happen. So grab all the fun you can while you're here. Be a good hedonist, a good scientific materialist, a good superstitious, godless scientist. And the beautiful thing of it is, Americans, if I tell them this, what do they say? I have nothing to do with it. Yeah, you do. You accept all the idols and the beliefs of the scientists. And what happens then? You didn't know that the laws support, the demonic laws support the killing of your I am, of your eternal self. That's the whole point of these demons. They like to stay hidden, but for someone who is cursed with clairvoyance, they don't stay hidden. So the first thing I see when I look at somebody is, are there elementals hanging out around them? Because if they have, I'm going to have to protect myself better. Second thing, I look straight into their heart. And there's a box in the heart, a little treasure chest. And inside of that is your karma. And your karma looks like little pink drops, magenta colored drops of flames that keep burning, but are iridescent and ethereal, okay? So the number of those drops in your heart tells anyone who you are and how much good you've done in this life. And then I look to the head, and I look straight through, right here, into their pineal gland. And as I do, you get to see the pituitary, the third ventricle, the hypothalamus, and then to the pineal gland, the corpus quadrigemini. You look at all of those, boom, 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 boom. And as you do, you can see how much brain sand is there. If they don't have very many calcium carbonate crystals, which look like little shining stars inside their pineal gland, and if their pineal gland doesn't stand up when you ask them a question, ask them a spiritual question, if it doesn't stand up, because the pineal gland can lie down and the aqueduct won't send in cerebral spinal fluid, or it can stand up. And so I asked them a question. Do you go to church? Boom. I get to see immediately. Did their pineal gland stand up? And are there any calcium carbonate crystals in there? You also have two other types of crystals that you'll find in there. And when you find those, then you know the person is falling for Lucifer, Ahriman, and the Luciferic Ahrimanic delusion, as it were. So that's the second thing I look at. Third thing I look at is into their metabolic system, two fingers below the belly button, and see what their fire in the belly looks like. Because the fire in the belly is called the tumo, it's called the fierce woman, it's called the bowl, that there's a fire underneath it, and that gives you all your energy. So if the person doesn't have a strong fire, of course they're going to have problems. They're going to be sick. So what's the next thing I look at? I look at either the 7 chakras or the 7 organs, depending upon what I've seen so far. But I'm going to look at their organs. I'm going to look at the surface of their organs, and I'm going to see whether they're healthy, because that's where your memory lies, and that's where your connection directly with the moving planets in our solar system are connected through morphic resonance. And if there's no morphic resonance for one or the other, that's going to be what they're going to get sick with. And so let's say I look at them and I say that their pancreas is just a mess. Well, then they eat too much sugar. So then I look at their liver, and of course their liver is, so what are they going to be? They're going to be angry all the time. And they're going to be going up and down in the cycle of the liver being not given what it needs to be healthy. So you can literally look into their organs, and you're hearing the planets. I literally hear the planets, and whether they're making a resonant sound, and I've had this 7 sounds going on in my head ever since I can ever remember. Each of them is a planet, and one of them is the sun, of course. And then lower in your body, in the metabolic system, you can also feel the moon and the rhythms of the moon. But so you're looking at their organs, and then you look at their chakras. Now, here's what a chakra looks like, just as John pointed out. The astral body comes up through the spine and into the head, and it comes up and it makes a curve and goes through over the pineal gland, through the third ventricle, all the way to the pituitary gland. And then when you really have a moment of illumination, the pituitary gland excretes pituitrin, and that gives you literally the dew of heaven, the soma, the amrita, that's the drink of the gods, the ambrosia and the nectar of the gods. And that can happen through a kundalini blast that starts at the base of your spine, goes all the way up your spine. Well, that's an astral snake. You don't want that. Trust me, you don't want that to happen. And especially you don't want that to happen accidentally. You want to go from the heart up to the same place and cause the same stimulation consciously. Now, how many people can do that? Very few. So as you're looking at a person and you're seeing these chakras, here's what you see. The energy comes in from the back. So if they're obsessed or possessed, there's a dark, black, cirrus cloud-looking thing streaming into that chakra. So you can just simply look at the person and go, holy moly, you got 3 of your chakras given over to the devils. That's not going to be such a fun reading. Or they could be bringing in light and sending it out, amplifying it and sending it out through the front of the chakra. And that has 3 levels. There's a physical, that's the nerve ganglia. There's the etheric, that's the light. There's the astral. Astral's the light, etheric is the sound. So from every chakra, especially the major chakras, and as John pointed out, the one you want to look at first is right at the heart, basically, the solar plexus and the heart, right? And let's just describe that. It has a certain number of petals. Some of those petals, half of them are from the past. So that's how you can read someone's past. They think it's a big deal to read the past. It's nothing to read the past if you can go into the ego, astral, etheric, and physical realm. And you penetrate in with a question or just simply to observe if the person's sending it out willingly, then you can observe it. If not, you may have to sound it out. And what you're going to see in the heart is each petal is it's not like a rose. It's an open rose. You can call it an open rose with all these different petals. And half are from the past and they're kind of recessed and the other half are forward. And they're not one color. There's not one color emanating from a chakra. There's multiple colors and multiple sounds and multiple forms, the skandhas that John described. So you look at that and you're seeing whether it's flowing through. And then you look up and down at the different chakras and you see how they are either flowing out or not. Sometimes when a person is possessed, they don't even have chakras. They become one big, ugly, gigantic, nasty black chakra, and it's all flowing in total chaos. So when you first meet someone, as Tyler pointed out, you hear the selfless sound of Christ as the carrier frequency. Now, I'm a tech guy from the old days, and so there's heterodyne frequencies. We had to figure it out. Here's the carrier frequency. It's one certain frequency. We could call that the Schumann wave, between 7 and 8 hertz frequency per second. And you can hear that coming from the heart. And if you don't, they're not going to be healthy, neither physically, soul, or spirit. And so that heterodynes on top of that really becomes the carrier frequency. Then on top of that, the heterodyne frequencies of each of the organs is happening, each of the chakras is happening, and each level of the chakras are happening. And so you get to hear a cacophony of sounds that would normally cause you to faint. And if you were able to stay awake, Rudolf Steiner said you'd go into tremendous pain and then you'd die. That's what would happen if you really saw the truth of what someone was emitting. And if people knew what they were emitting, they would put some kind of auric blanket over them, psychic blanket, because most people look ugly as the demons of hell. Okay? Now, some are angels. I've met some people I literally thought were angels, and their chakras, they were beyond chakras. They were like, whoa, they can't even describe them. It was like the blue of the sky with the sun radiating through them, and there's nothing there, not a single atom, not one molecule. And that's usually right before you die. And they've completely dissolved their physical body. And that's a completely different thing. But in general, most people are messed up. And if they're coming for a reading, or you go to work in an organization, or you try to work for the government or the military or state education, federal education, or most of these giant organizations, you are going to encounter the evil that I'm talking about. And you need to carry that base frequency, the carrier frequency of the Christ. And and stimulates your three toruses. There's a torus coming from the head. It looks like a donut. The most important part is the hole in the middle. There's another one at the heart. It's 10 times bigger than the head. And again, the most important part is the hole in the middle of the heart. And then there's one coming out of your metabolic system, where I describe that as the fires of the belly. And that is created by cold fusion. Cold fission is created in the heart, and cold fission is created in the brain. So we have magneto-hydrodynamic generators in the head, in the heart, in the metabolic system that literally create bioelectric energy that can be measured by very sensitive devices, electrical gradient devices, and such. But a psychic can just put their hand out like an antenna and go, "Oh, well, your moon is so bad that, what, did you have problems having your first baby, and the baby was a girl, and now there's this and this and this and this and this happening? Why? Because I'm reading the moon. Because why? That jumped out at me, and the person has an illness, and they need to understand the karmic implications of it, so maybe they themselves can heal themselves. Nobody heals anybody. You heal yourself through your higher spirit, through the help of the spirits above you."
Yes, and so keep in mind that this has to do with becoming conscious of realms of being of which you're currently unconscious. But in those realms of which you're currently unconscious also includes those loved ones of yours that have passed across the threshold and all of that. But when you're dwelling in materialism, they can't really come into communion with where you keep your attention. And regarding this, Rudolf Steiner says, "But though this may be the case, we need not be discouraged, but should always cling to the positive aspect. And the positive aspect is that we genuinely strive for that condition which in certain moments of life, as the fruit of studying spiritual science, can give us a peacefulness of soul. What matters is that peacefulness of soul, the fine attuning in that peacefulness of soul, which makes it possible for us to receive these delicate, intimate manifestations and revelations from the kingdom of the dead. Something else, too, is necessary, and that is the goodwill to resist all the untruthfulness about which we have been speaking in these lectures. All these untruthfulnesses that buzz around the world enter into what might be called the spiritual aura and generate there a thick fog which the dead find impossible to penetrate. This thick fog contains all that black rubbish which comes, for instance, to name only one source, from today's journalism, in the form of untruths which are printed and repeated, creating an aura of untruthfulness spanning the earth. It is no exaggeration to say that it is extremely difficult for the dead to penetrate this black fog. Therefore, with the help of ideas such as those we've been developing concerning the absolutely concrete untruthfulness buzzing about the world, it is necessary to endeavor to reach clarity, to really make the effort in this field to recognize the purely external truth of the physical plane insofar as it is accessible to us, in order not to cover our soul with a dense fog through which the spiritual world simply cannot penetrate. You will understand how very necessary this is. And so, I mean, there you have it. It's up to us to penetrate the fog, that we actually literally can disperse this fog by just the clarity and purpose of our being. It's like when we first met the Dalai Lama in Ann Arbor, and Robert asked him a question, and Dalai Lama leans into him and he says, "More important than being smart, being clear."
Yes. And as a reader, if you can't create emptiness, then you're not going to be able to see, hear, or experience these things. And that's That's absolutely a key. And selflessness does what? It creates an emptiness. But the emptiness, when you truly attain it in Dzogchen in Tibetan Buddhism, what happens? You realize that the emptiness isn't infinite. It's finite. And because it's finite, it's contained. And because it's contained, it's a consciousness. So if you can reach emptiness, you reach a certain level of consciousness that then into that emptiness, according to the Tibetan Buddhism teachings and other Hindu teachings, there three things arise: light, sound, and words. And that's what I'm talking about. And literally, when you're doing a reading, many times, most of the time, words sound in your heart that you did not create. If you're being led by the Spirit, and if you've made an oath that you're only going to give readings to people if you don't charge money for it, or don't use it for your own advantage or gain or aggrandizement. And so if you've made a certain vow and you've worked out a certain thing, then you will probably be led. And when you're led, it shows up as light and color, sounds in harmony and in dissonance, and of course in the word. Matter of fact, the life ether is called the word ether, or I like to call it the creative word ether, because that's the thing. When you get used to the Spirit speaking to you and you learn their language, it's impossible really to ignore what they say, because it's always right. If it was true, and it was a true intuition, and intuitions show up as words, then it's correct inherently, by definition, it is correct. So when I would say to people crazy things, and I seldom ever see anybody again after years that they don't say, well, you remember what you said to me? And I'd say, no, I don't remember a thing I said to you, because I probably wasn't the one who said it. And then they say something to me, I go, I don't remember saying that. Man, that's really smart. I wish I would have said that. And that's what happens. It starts speaking through you. And so I would literally be able to say to people, as long as I was selfless, literally the names of the person that were causing them the problems, and when, and the remedy, and that their dead aunt is telling them this or that or whatever.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up. But before we do, I just want to let our audience know that Douglas and John are working very hard to provide you with, well, you are,
I am.
new titles out there. You see, we know that it's difficult to approach Steiner, and plus the important things that he had to say are just over so many lectures and books. And so what Douglas has done over the last 6 years, while we were doing all of our other stuff, he was pulling together these quotes, these passages, and arranging them in ways that you could better understand them. And they're going to be guides. We call the series, and we have, I think, at least 20 titles, probably more, from the works of Rudolf Steiner. And then Douglas will explain what it is, what the topic is, walk you through the process, and give you these brilliant pulls from Steiner. The other thing is, Douglas also has some freestanding books that he's doing, and they are so incredibly detailed anthroposophically that the only person that we knew that could do the editing was John Barnwell. So John is doing all this deep editing, making sure that Douglas has described things exactly the way Steiner would have wanted. And thank you so much, John. And John himself is taking some of his books, which have been hugely popular. People want them, but they can't get them because they were printed back in the day when you would get print copies, not on demand. And he's working with publishers now so that this can go up on Amazon. So we're providing you with a spiritual library that will be as vast and as extensive as what we just completed, which was the truth history of the modern world, as told through a case study of the theft of social media. So I say, give us kudos. We've been really good teachers, and we've had to produce a lot of material to give you original content. Good job, guys.
And none of it would be done without our beloved Tyler, because
that's right.
I would simply, my ideal job is being a lazy boy tester.
Right.
I just sit in my chair, but,
Right.
if she says, no, you're going to do this. And I'm like, well, I am sitting here. I might as well do something.
What else are we going to do with these two brilliant minds who look very professorial? And just to kind of give you also an understanding, you see, you may have come and met us through the AIM School of Truth. And what we were trying to do, well, what we did was we were teaching you modern world history, but using actual truth, not propaganda that the Pilgrim Society would have pushed out. But now what Douglas and John are doing as spiritual professors is that they're walking you into the truth about the spiritual world. So we hope that you'll stick with us, ask your questions in the comments. And I think that's it. John, you want to wrap up for us?
Yes. And so in closing, and thank you, the industrious and wonderful Dr. Tyler Gabriel. Isn't she something? In closing, I'd like to share with you a brief statement of Novalis, George Philip Friedrich Freiherr von Hardenberg, who passed in 1801 at a young age. He says, and I quote, "When it has become clear to us that the world is God's kingdom, when this great conviction has once penetrated our minds in its infinite fullness, then we go comforted along life's dark path and contemplate its storm and dangers with a deep divine peace."